So we're starting out with Arun Gupta, the CEO of NobleReach Foundation. And you can also find his book on a table out back by registration. So give him a warm round of applause and bring him out on stage.
All right, well, thank you for having me. I'm coming off a red eye from New York, so bear with me, but hopefully we'll get you through this. Arun Gupta, CEO of NobleReach Foundation. We'll talk to you a little bit more about what we're doing, and we'll start with a little bit of the overview of the book that's outside called Venture Meets Mission. So, just to level set, let me give you a little bit about my background, because it'll provide a little bit of the lens of which I view kind of some of the problems set from. My father worked in public service for 45 years, is still in Naval Sea System Command, so it's been in our family deeply. My career, however, was in venture capital. I started at Carlyle, and then the bulk of my career was at Columbia Capital with Senator Mark Warner, and that's where we really intersected with the intersection of mission, tech, and entrepreneurship. I was on the Obama tech transition team, and then in 2008 on, really led our practice looking at how we can innovate with government tech appropriately. I retired in around 2017-18 and started thinking about what was next. I was teaching at Georgetown and Stanford, and I started teaching a class at Stanford called Valley Meets Mission. And it was really a class really to talk to the students about how do we take the entrepreneurial spirit of the Valley, but let's not waste it on Candy Crush 3.0. Right, we have bigger problems to go solve, and we need to think about how to do that and bring it to solving larger problems with the scale and reach of government. And what we found is that as students kind of got comfortable with this world, they started rescinding their banking and consulting offers and kind of coming in and going into these kinds of opportunities. And that was really the predecessor for wanting to write the book to amplify the message, which we'll talk about here shortly. And then today we now have a foundation based on the book, where we have about a $500 million endowment, and we put to practice a lot of the things that we talk about, which is like, how do we inspire this next generation around public service? So we open the book with this quote, because I think it captures the unsettling feeling that people have in a rapidly changing world right now. And we remind folks that this was actually said 60 years ago by John F. Kennedy. And the point being that I think every generation has that unsettling feeling at some point. And I think we're in one of those moments today, and those moments are usually a call to action. In a rapidly changing world, what we try to highlight in the book is that the mindset we need, though, is not one of planning, but it's one that's really based on, the entrepreneurial community. For anyone that had a 5-year plan, they probably didn't have ChatGPT or generative AI in it. And so what we need are folks that are comfortable building the plane while you're flying it. And then we also need to think about, like, how do we inspire this next generation, more importantly, to come into this world? Our top tech talent, the common thread between these two areas of entrepreneurs, having been there for 20 years, investing with them, and then teaching on college campuses, the common through line that I found is optimism. Students bring optimism, entrepreneurs bring optimism, and if we're going to solve a lot of these large social problems, we need that optimism to come to bear. So what we try to do in the book is we start with trying to break down some of the biases that we have that keep us from getting there. So one is kind of the vernacular that we use, which is an artificial binary choice. For-profit, not-for-profit, private sector, public sector. One's about making money, the other one's about doing good. And I would get students asking me about, like, how do I choose between the two? And part of it is that we haven't given them a language to grab on that there's a middle ground there to be able to do both. In addition, we see innovation across all three sectors of academia, government, and industry, but they're stovepiped. And what we need to start seeing is how do we bring this innovation ecosystem together in a much more collaborative way. And in doing so, bringing the talent from our academic ecosystem into bear, and then bringing the innovation from our entrepreneurial ecosystem into it. The barrier right now has been a lack of trust, right? There's a breakdown in trust, and that's really the barrier that keeps us from happening. So then we start to explore, why is that trust? How do we rebuild that trust? And so in the book, we talk a bit about humanizing government and then personalizing entrepreneurship. And what that means is that it's very easy when everyone goes into their domain, whether it be go into academia, go into the private sector, to demonize the other sectors. And I think in talking about government, we need to break it down into a more human level, because it really is just a set of organizations made up at a more molecular level of individuals. 99% of government are people going to work with positive intent, trying to do the best they can. Could it be done faster, better, cheaper? Probably. But that's true about any organization. And so it's important to humanize government in that level, because when someone says we don't need government, you start asking the question of what part don't you want? And when you start breaking it down, it becomes harder to ask, to answer that question. And so I think the humanization of that is incredibly important. Likewise with entrepreneurship, there's a whole group of people that will say entrepreneurial capitalism is socially extractive, and they're conflating it with the billionaire class. And while that may be true in those examples are 0.0001% of entrepreneurs. And entrepreneurship focus should be more on the mindset, right? What does it mean to be resilient, gritty, job creating, taking risks? And that's an important part of I think the democratic spirit of what makes democratic communities so powerful. But we try to personalize entrepreneurship as well, is that it doesn't mean you're just starting a company, right? For those that have families here, starting a family arguably is about as entrepreneurial of an endeavor as you're gonna have. I mean, you're gonna have a co-founder, you're gonna have a few products, you have 18 years of product market fit, and then you launch them. And you hope they don't come back, but they may, and then you launch them again to grad school. But the point being that how you approach your day-to-day life can be very entrepreneurial. And it doesn't need to be something that you just do as starting a business. The other thing that we try to talk about before we can get into solutions is really understanding and appreciating the difference in the risk cultures of government and in the private sector. I say, as a VC, if I was measured like government, I would never raise another fund. So what does that mean? As a VC, I can make 10 bets. 2 of them can be, blowout home runs. 6 can be zeros, and the rest can be average, and I'll be oversubscribed to my next fund. Primarily because I am measured on my best deals, right? As long as the portfolio looks great, I win. As government, I can make 10 bets. 9 of them can be okay, but if one of them's called Solyndra, I'm carrying that around with me for the next 9 years. And that has important implications, because in one ecosystem, you're playing to win, and the other one, you're playing not to lose. And it's just important to understand that that's a dynamic we've created, right? One of my colleagues, Dan Tangerlini, had a quote of saying, look, part of this is in government agencies, every government agency, at least in the US, has an inspector general. And their whole job is to make sure you stay within the playbook. And if you deviate, you could get called in front of a congressional hearing. And his point was you should have 2 IGs to overcome that. And you're like, how's that gonna help? And he was saying the other IG should be an innovation general. Because you need somebody making sure you're innovating fast enough as well, and creating a positive repercussion for lack of innovation that you could be brought in front of a congressional hearing as well. And while that's an interesting thought exercise and may not happen, it does make you reflect on how do we create the partnership between government and the entrepreneurial ecosystem so that we can get the best of both in how we operate. Look, I fundamentally believe democracy's 2 great superpowers, evident by everything here in the EU and in the US, is our ability to create talent, our higher ed ecosystem, our ability to encourage debate, thought, and exchange of ideas, and our ability to innovate, our entrepreneurial ecosystem. There's nothing like this anywhere else in the world, right? And the evidence of that is everyone from around the world comes to these places to get their higher education and to start companies. And so we need to think about, as a government, if we're going to really continue to compete in great power competition against autocratic adversaries, how do we leverage these 2 superpowers? And these 2 things are really hard to replicate. You don't just tomorrow open up and create a higher ed ecosystem like we have in democratic countries, and you don't create an entrepreneurial ecosystem. And reason is it's deeply cultural. It takes time. And if it was easy, it would have been done by now, and it's not happening. So that's what we try to talk about in the book. And so we get into then the real notion of how do we create a renewed partnership between government and ventures. Look, I don't need to tell all of you, public-private partnerships have been around forever. People have been talking about this for decades. But this isn't public-private partnerships in my mind, and this is part of the misnomer. Public-private partnerships implies big companies, companies with real revenue, with profit, with lots of people, with lots of contracts. You know, ventures are something, as you're hearing, you know, through the day, they're not fully funded, right? You're building the team while you're building the product to partner with government. There's a very different way we need to be interacting with the venture community in this capacity. And I think that's what we try to highlight in the book, was just to try to probe out there, what are the issues with treating of traditional public-private partnership models, and then what are ways that ventures and, you know, that are out there today are overcoming those problems. You know, and there's an important role for government to play in this process as well. You know, I was just talking about this backstage with Paul Kwan, is that, you know, we lay out, you know, the role that government can play in being able to develop talent, mobilize capital, but an important one is how it can procure value. So what do I mean by that? You know, I think there is a misnomer in government many times that if you're interacting with startups, what they need is capital, right? And so you see grants and funding that can go out to these startups. And look, as a VC, I'll tell you that's the last thing the startups need. What the startups need are contracts, right? The capital's out there with the VCs and the private community, and the difference between capital and contracts, or grants and contracts, is it's subtle, but it's incredibly important. Contracts come with demand signal. Grants don't. Grant just says you know how to write a great grant, but it doesn't give me any way to assess the market opportunity for the product or service that you're providing. A contract does. And the contract then allows the private sector to mobilize appropriately to see how we can either fund that entity or look to create other opportunities of financing along that path. And so I think these subtle but important differences are incredibly important as we think about creating a renewed partnership between government and the private sector. You know, what we try to then close out in the book is, you know, laying out a vision of the future, and we try to layer this into three levels. We start at the individual level, right? How do we start thinking about embracing and encouraging and showcasing nonlinear careers? You know, I think our academic institutions are lagging in this context. They still prepare our next generation for a career. And as I tell my students, all of you are going to have 4 to 5 careers over the course of your professional journey. And how do you think about that? How do you think about nonlinear careers and not be daunted by it? And in fact, embrace it. I think most of you in this room probably are living that in some capacity. And I'll tell you, coming off of, as I head into my 30-year business school reunion, you know, the most interesting people are the ones that live nonlinear careers. The ones that were doing the same thing for 30 years, it's just not that interesting. It's just kind of boring. You know, I think how organizations react, right? How do we create the right on-ramps and off-ramps to encourage nonlinear careers and bringing people in is incredibly important. And then, you know, how we as a society share this risk, right, between government and the private sector to be able to encourage this. And so what we try to talk about in the book then, you know, and we close out with is a level of real optimism, right? I've got 2 kids in college right now, and, you know, I teach on college campuses, and I tell these students, I'm like, if I were you, you guys need to make your own choice, but this idea of going into banking, consulting, or the traditional routes, that just feels passé. Because at some point, you're going to start to think about, like, what is my greater purpose? What do I want to do? And how do you tie that together? And these don't need to be independent activities. And I think what's got me most excited about this is when you look at the major sectors that are out there today that are going through massive disruption, like climate, like cyber, healthcare, you know, food, defense, space. These are massive sectors, right? And when sectors go through massive disruption, you know, folks like you've heard earlier, it really is exciting for venture guys to get involved. However, venture folks are usually followers, not leaders. Having been in that industry, we wait to see success stories. And the difference between today and even 5 years ago is we have those success stories. And those success stories are companies that are now worth 10, 15, 20 billion dollars over a period of time. And what that has now done and triggered is a flood of capital from other venture folks saying, hey, there's money to be made here. And that's incredibly important, because now that you have those breakthrough examples across these each sectors, you're seeing a lot of capital come in, not only from VCs, but from foundations, sovereign wealth funds. And once capital flows, you see the quality of management teams get better. People feel like it's less risky. I can go out and raise money across these opportunities. And in some of these opportunities now, I can start with a $40 to $50 million raise if I've got the right team around me. That's incredibly powerful in being able to, really disrupt these large industries. And it's happening. It's happening all around us right now. Once you have that going, you have people wondering, going from like, why would I do that, to wow, I'm getting to do this. Like, that emotional reaction is incredibly important. And then with that, you build a stronger ecosystem, you build a stronger ecosystem, and the sectors become even more interesting. That's the virtuous cycle. And look, this is the story of the Valley. This isn't a new story. And the irony is, in the poetic justice, I think, in some of this, is that the Valley was started with government financing, right? For those that know the history of the Valley, it was government defense funding that started the Valley. And now I think we're coming back full circle, where it's the Valley collaborating with government and our allies to go really think about, like, how do we solve these big problems? So let me give you 2 minutes real quick on what we're doing at NobleReach along these lines. So we have a foundation, we have a $500 million endowment. We look at ourselves as being, trying to create infrastructure to connect our top tech talent into this ecosystem and connect top entrepreneurs to also innovate in this ecosystem. I use the word infrastructure intentionally because I think what's lacking right now is the modernization of this infrastructure for the talent that's there. Over decades, we've let it kind of wither. So we've got a great talent ecosystem and we've got a great innovation ecosystem. We just haven't really connected it in a meaningful way to government. Everyone needs a logo slide. We're collaborating with leading universities. Right now we've been very US focused, but we're starting to look at more things here in the EU and specifically in the UK as well. We're collaborating with government agencies and private sector partners. We've got 3 main things that we're doing. One is talent. We've created a Think Teach for America kind of program where we take our top tech talent, AI, cyber, deep tech folks, bio, and we're recruiting them out of universities, top universities, and we're putting them in government for a year or 2. We had 1,200 applicants in the first 48 hours. We placed 20 students. Incredibly competitive, all coming from the top universities. And we're right now placing them at Space Force, Navy, CISA, Treasury, Commerce, FDA, and HUD. We're also now in conversations with supporting efforts with the UK and are looking to expand internationally as well. In addition to that, the second vertical that we have is we're collaborating with academic and government research institutes to help take their science and marry that to entrepreneurs that we can help commercialize that in a meaningful way. So rather than having that science hit the valley of death and going counterclockwise, that we bring it out into the wild where you can put the right tech, talent, and capital around that technology and commercialize it. We've now done about 90 of these in the last 2.5 years and spun them out. And what we found is we've been able to go and raise over $1.2 billion around these opportunities. Again, this is all science that was just sitting inside the government labs, academic centers, et cetera. But if we can create that renewed partnership with entrepreneurs, we can actually bring this out and make this viable and commercialize more effectively as a country. And the final piece what we're doing is an academic program where we are not waiting for students to graduate to inspire them around public service, but we're creating a program called Innovation for Impact, where we've taken a Hacking for Defense team and brought them underneath us, and we're creating around entrepreneurial pedagogy of lean startup. How do you go solve social problems in a for-profit way around health, bio, climate, national security, and cyber? We're now teaching that on 20 campuses. We're looking to expand now to the UK as well, and we've got a lot of interest on that front. So, we've also launched a Innovation for Public Service certificate at Purdue, which we're looking to open source. First of its kind, believe it or not. Idea here is that part of the reason we have so few STEM students going into public service is we have so few STEM faculty that have been in public service. So let's make it an option. And we've created a certificate where if you're a four-year graduate student, you can graduate with it. We found 15% of students are now opting in for it. So I think there's a real demand right now for students wanting to be part of this mission venture ecosystem in a much more meaningful way. And so we at NobleReach are really playing at this level of how do we bring our top talent and top innovation. And I think this is the crux, and this will be the challenge for our democratic societies over the next 2 decades. Can we do this effectively? We have the capability. In the book, what we try to highlight, this isn't about can we do this? It's about we do it when we need to do it. Can we make this more a regular thing that we do? SpaceX is a good example of this. Moderna is a great example of this as well. When our backs are up against the wall, we know how to collaborate, but we just need to make this the norm. So with that, thank you very much.